everyone, welcome back to day 2. My name is Melody, I'm your host, and I'm here with Marc Anderson.
Hello everyone.
Yay, hello everyone in the chat. It's so nice to see you all. I see some familiar names. Hello to Keita, Anna, Jordan, Tony, Rashid, Pokey, and Sam. Thank you all for joining us again. We are doing UI UX for our segment today, and I'm really excited for day 2. And we also have a great week planned for you. So let's take a quick look at the schedule to see what else is coming up for today. So at 9:30, which is right now, we have UX Design with Marc. And then at 11:30, we have Howard doing the XD Daily Creative Challenge videos. And then at 12, we'll have Terry White with the Photography Daily Creative Challenge. And then at 12:30, we have Graphic Design with Amber Assay. So it's a great lineup.
That is a good lineup, yeah.
Yes.
Full day again today.
Yes, full day. And once again, for everyone in the chat, we are doing a chat and win giveaway in about 30 minutes. And I'm super excited. It's going to be 100 custom stickers from Sticker Mule, so an awesome prize. And all you have to do to be entered to win is just be active in the chat. If you have any questions about design or business, feel free to ask them and Marc will answer them. And then in about an hour and a half, we're going to be looking over your designs for the XD Daily Creative Challenge. And we looked at some yesterday and they were amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really fun. Today's challenge topic is to design the account settings experience for a movie app. And for this daily creative challenge week, we've been doing movie player apps. So this is kind of a continuation of that, but even if you're not caught up to today, don't worry, you can still submit anything that you have worked on so far for the XD Daily Creative Challenge, and you can submit that on our Discord channel. And if you go to behance.net/daily creative challenge, you can actually, oh, yay, the bit.ly link. Okay, so if you head over to this link, bit.ly/XD Discord, you can join our Discord channel. And we were on Slack. We had the XD Slack, but we are trying out Discord, and there's about 4,000 people on there, which is amazing.
I just joined yesterday.
Yay,
yeah.
Awesome. I'm so happy. And everyone there is super awesome, and everyone is giving such great feedback, and it's really awesome to see the community. I can show you really quickly what Discord kind of looks like. It looks similar to Slack, but it's awesome. There's some mentors, we have some Adobe people, and there's 350 people online right now, which is awesome. And so today, if you submit something into this design feedback channel that you've been working on for the daily creative challenges, we will be looking at them and giving you feedback.
That's great.
So yay, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So I can turn it over to Marc. Maybe you can give a quick recap.
Do a quick little recap. Yeah. Pulled my slide back up again. If you want to follow the social channels related to either myself or Rainfall, which is the studio that I founded and function as design director of. So a little bit of info there about me. So for those of you, I guess we can jump right in. Should we jump right into the project? For those of you that were with us yesterday, you kind of understand where we're starting from with the mobile app that we're working on. For those that are new, we're working on the user experience of a mobile app that is related to food delivery. So this is a company that creates pre-prepared, pre-packaged meals that are sent to you in weekly chunks. So you could get up to 3 meals a day already ready to go. And then what they are trying to move into is into doing more social good as part of their mission. So for every meal that you purchase, a portion or a full meal is donated to someone in need. And so what we're trying to do through this mobile app is to encourage people to engage more and purchase more meals through this company so that they are actually donating more meals as part of that process. So I think today we're gonna probably go into that order flow a little bit. We'll play with what it means to order meals, how that looks, and how we bring in that donation element to that process. And we can go over some of the design that we did yesterday, see where that ended up after we were live yesterday, and how the evolution of that product has changed.
Yay, sounds awesome.
Great.
Keita has a quick question for you. What
Sure.
does your company logo look like?
It looks like well, where if I move out of the way? No, I can't quite move out of the way. So it's down there. Let me see if I can slide this over.
Oh yeah.
We actually, so this is a trope of a lot of branding agencies or agencies that work in branding, is that the first thing to fall by the wayside is your own visual identity, because you're so busy working on client work all the time. So when I first founded Rainfall, we were a little bit more aggressive, I think, in terms of our visual identity. A lot of use of black, big capital letters, and then I wanted something a little bit softer, a little bit more friendly and modern, that could be transferable across a lot of projects. So we chose this typeface, which is called RM Pro by a studio called the Designers Foundry, and we use that for pretty much everything. So we have a kind of an alternative A from their character set that we use within our Rainfall logo, and then we have the dot there too. So if we want to get really conceptual, the period after rainfall kind of signifies the falling of rain. So we have the period, the dot over the I, and then the period after the mark,
like
and so we
that.
have kind of the pitter patter going on there.
And then the L's kind of like look like they're falling.
That's
a
true.
little bit
Yeah,
too.
that's right. Yeah, so much meaning wrapped up in such a small
that's
mark.
awesome.
But yeah, it's kind of fun. It's something that I encourage people to not get too wrapped up in if they're starting their own business. You want some sort of identity that is recognizable to your clients and consistent. Really, it's consistency that is the core of good brand identity that we try for. So we always use this really electric blue in a lot of our slides, and that way when you're receiving a presentation from us, whether it's documents or something that actually includes work, it all looks consistent, and you know that it's coming from Rainfall.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm going to close this out here, and I'm going to actually switch back over to our mobile app design. So we worked on this a little bit yesterday. Anyone who's returning kind of understands what we have or what we're looking at here. A little bit of evolution in terms of I was tightening up the design after we went off the air yesterday so that we have a little bit more of a complete thought that we can work from at this point. So this is the landing experience of the mobile app. Remember that the users that are coming in and engaging with this product are probably coming in maybe once a week, or if they're more active, potentially once or twice a day. But we didn't want to assume that someone's going to be engaging with this constantly throughout their daily life. And that kind of just gets into overall app engagement and what we can expect from a typical user. So what we do is when a user comes in, we message them with whatever we feel is relevant at any given point in time, which in this case is that a meal is coming up. And then we can use that as a platform to really start a conversation about food and their donating habits as it relates to this platform. So we have our landing experience here. It's telling us lunch is coming. Right below that, we see what lunch is going to be. And then the thing that we got into yesterday with our user flow design was the ability to skip a meal and what that meant. So I think we only got to this screen yesterday where we were asking our users why they were skipping. And then what it allowed them to do, I guess we got to this screen, what it allowed them to do was as part of that kind of process of skipping a meal, it was encouraging them to donate to people in need as part of that flow. So the big idea there was if you're indulging by going out to eat, maybe you can indulge a little bit more, donate a little bit of money, and help someone else experience the same joy that you get out of going out for that meal. So we could start that at $1, it could go up to $5, $10, $20, whatever it is, based on how extravagant you feel that you are being with your meal choice. You can then turn around and donate that meal to someone as well. So that's where we got into kind of some interesting UI features with this slider that then turns into a button. Yeah. So I think today what might be interesting is to really focus on what happens when the user selects this button right here. And remember, yesterday we talked about why the height of this button is kind of funky, because it's sitting on the bottom of an iPhone experience where our screen height is a little bit kind of different than you would expect from a traditional phone layout where we kind of drop off the bottom.
Yeah.
So the idea with this order flow is that it will actually come up over top of our entire experience, because what we're going to do is actually focus the user on that particular flow at that point. And that's something that I think is really important with mobile app design, is really trying to segment what the expected user experience is at any given point and really allow the user to focus on just that experience. So that's something that we see as a potential issue sometimes with mobile apps is where we start to guide our user down a particular experience, but we allow them too many opportunities to get distracted or go on different paths, which then just make the overall flow design really complicated, because at any given point you could potentially jump out of a flow, but then jump back in, and we just need to kind of solve for those potential issues. Yeah. So I'm going to drop down here a couple other little previews that we can talk about if we want. I did a little quick hit of a detail view of a particular meal. So we won't go back to the sketches that we showed yesterday, but the idea is that if you were to tap on any of these cards that relate to a meal, what it would do is actually take over the screen and show you a detailed view of that meal, including what the ingredients are, how it might affect your health in a positive way, all of the other attributes of those meals. And a lot of the meals that this company provides are vegan and gluten-free, so that's called out specifically within that. Yeah. Cool. So from a design perspective, if we just kind of go back and forth here, I don't want to make you guys too seasick by jumping around, but something that I really like with card layouts is that when you tap on a card and move into that experience, what we can do is basically just create a larger version of that card that is taking over the screen. So, and this is something that is easier to visualize in more of a prototype mode, but you could imagine that if we were to tap on this card right here, what's going to happen is that we're going to kind of zoom into that view. It's going to retain all of its layout properties, but that image might go full width on the screen. That title might move down. And so what that is really doing conceptually is zooming us into that view. And so that's what we see within this layout here, is that we're following the same structure that we had within that card, but it's almost as though we're looking a little bit closer at that card, and it gives us more ability to then go into a scrolling view where we can explore more about that meal.
And so on here you have the ingredients, and then
so I have
it's kind of hard to read.
Yeah,
from back here.
Yeah, we're zoomed way out. So
bit?
we have a little bit of a description here,
Ooh.
and then we have the ingredients that it contains.
Oh,
so
I see.
what we might want to do is actually, this is where we look at hierarchy, and I talked about this yesterday with some of the work that we looked at was the overall type design of detailed views. And so this we could consider kind of an early stage look at this particular view, because maybe the typography is not all worked out. I'm kind of not following my own rules here that I was setting up yesterday with everything being very small. So what might make sense is, we can play with this a little bit. We have the time. We could make this a little bit bigger. We might have to play with the overall text box size here, but we might want to make this description a little bit larger so it stands out a little more, but doesn't compete too much with the title here. And this is something that with design, I really kind of play with for a while to make sure that our hierarchy is really working, and we're not creating a layout that's causing our user's eye to jump around here. This might be too big, for instance, in relation to this title, so maybe it makes sense to actually make that title even bigger to really jump out and help people understand what it is that they're going to eat.
I like how the way they describe their food makes it sound like really good, like saffron simmered oats. And I don't really like oatmeal, but I kind of want to try this.
Yeah, it does sound really good.
Because of how it
right?
sounds.
I haven't eaten breakfast yet today, and it's making me hungry.
Yeah.
So maybe we make this a little bit taller. We'll kind of play with some of the design here as well. So see, even just by doing that, making this title a little bit larger, now we're not fully conforming to the previous layout that we came from. We're making particular adjustments within this layout, but as much as we want consistency, we also have this overarching rule that we want to do whatever looks best and functions best. So in this case, we're willing to break those consistency rules just so that we can make an experience that is really simple to engage with for our users. So maybe we'll come back to this layout in a little bit. I have some icons that we could drop in here and really make this visually pop, but I think I want to move on to the order flow just because it's a little bit more intense in terms of its functionality that we want to play with. So I'm gonna have to adjust some colors here so that we can see them on screen, but what I did is I started this framework for how I want my meal ordering.
I didn't even see them.
Oh yeah, I've got them hidden away right here. I like very subtle colors such that you can't even see them sometimes. But if you remember what we talked about yesterday and what I talked about a little bit at the top here is that this button, this Order More Meals button, is going to initiate a panel that is going to slide up over our view. So what I really like, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, where when we start app design at Rainfall, what we do is we really think about the framework, which is how different screens interact with each other. I really like when there's seamless transitions. So you could picture a non-seamless transition being a hard load between one screen and the other, where the screen goes blank and then a new screen pops up. In app design, that's less prevalent because you're really thinking about these flows as a product and how all of these screens interact with each other. So a good example is where this button slides up to the top and then is going to become our title on the next screen. So in a perfect world, the way that that would work is that this would be a black background with that white text, so it literally looks like our button's moving up. But
that would look really cool.
yeah, should we try that?
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned that it might look like a call to action, and we're kind of starting to fudge our colors, but let's try it, and we can let the audience decide what they think works best.
Yeah.
So what happened here, remember, is that we had that button that was down at the bottom that then came up and became our title. So we're using, if we just scroll back and forth here, we're using a slightly different type size because now we've moved into that title area. So again, we're fudging those rules a little bit just because we're going with that overarching rule of doing what looks and functions best. And functionality in this case, as a title, we want our text to be a little bit smaller so it's not so commanding. And then we need an ability to get out of this flow and go back to our original flow if we want to. So we could map that out in a real world scenario. We would map that out just so that we understand how everything is functioning in relationship to everything else. But this is a simple enough flow that I think we all understand that it's a panel that moves up, and then if we tap on that arrow, it's a panel that's going to move back down and get us out of that flow. So we have to do a little bit of flipping here where we need to, we're just gonna not worry about our app components right now, but we're gonna take this rectangle that we have in the background and make it black. So we just simply come over to the colors here. We remember that 000 is black, and then we just start flipping the colors that we have. Now, one of the things that's really nice about XD is that we can save all of these styles and just quickly apply them. I don't have that set up for this particular project, so we're gonna have to go a little bit more manual here with our approach, but that's something that as we would work through this product and really build out all of those additional screens, we'd start building those styles as well so that we can easily share them amongst team members. So I'm just gonna grab my arrow here that I've built as a custom component of lines. We'll make that white as well. And then this is my background here that we have that we're gonna make white. And I had it set way down in terms of its opacity. So if we set it up to 100, that's what it looks like as a pure white circle. This is something where we could leave it like that, but I think it'd be nice to make it a little bit softer so that it doesn't become such an overwhelming object. And so for those of you out there that design for Android or even earlier versions of the iPhone, this is always disconcerting to me because we have to make room for that bar that comes down. And so just looking at the layout, you're like, everything is shifted very far down, but we just have to trust that the phone is going to display it properly. So now we want to figure out what we want the opacity of this outline to be to feel a little bit softer. So maybe we'll start at 20% of the white. It's a little bit soft. We're gonna try to make everything a little bit more bold so that people can see it at home. But see, even that, we look a little bit nicer just in terms of the overall softness of our background color. Might move this arrow up a little bit just to make sure it looks visually centered.
Rashid is asking what the name of the font is again.
Yes, so this is Futura Condensed, and we're using a number of weights here. We're using medium right now. And what's nice about this is you can sync it right from Typekit and follow along. So this is, we talked a little bit about typefaces yesterday and functionality and legibility and the kind of pitfalls of this typeface in particular for mobile experiences. Just because it is so condensed, it's a little bit more difficult to read from further away. So in a real world situation where when we work further with this client, we might readdress this typeface, but considering this is a brand font, we want to start by using that as our kind of jumping off point, and then we can explore more as we move forward. We also talked about how typefaces that are in use by global brands tend to be more associated visually with those global brands. Future Condensed in particular is one of those typefaces, especially as we start to use it in black and white situations right here where it feels a little bit more aggressive. We're going to look a little bit sporty if we're not careful. So that's something to consider. A simple way to do that would be to say, okay, maybe we don't use capital letters in our titles. Maybe what we do is we switch it to title case, for instance. And what's really nice about XD is that we can go in and just simply flip between the different type styles. Yeah. So that actually looks a little bit more friendly, which is nice. I'm going to leave it as caps for now, just because we now have consistency across other screens. But we can maybe do a visual pass later and decide if we want to make those adjustments. So what is everyone thinking? Do we think that the white or the black is working better on our
Let us know in the chat which one you prefer.
Yeah. While we sort that out, I'm going to work on this next section below that we see, which is the beginning of a thought that maybe we can kind of work out here in real time. Yeah. So my thinking with this is that we need some sort of indication as to the accumulation of meals that we're going to be selecting from our main view down below. And so we order through this client of ours. You can order a week's worth of meals at a time. And a week to them is defined as 5 days because there's an understanding that you're busy during the week. And during the weekend, you have the ability to probably purchase whatever meals you want to eat. Maybe you're going to go out, see friends. So part of eating healthy and setting a healthy lifestyle is just setting realistic expectations for your eating habits. So what we would allow people to do is order up to 5 days worth of meals, and then a day consists of 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there's snacks and other things that we can add to that. But from a high level perspective within this view, I wanted some way to visually represent how many meals you've added to your cart or your bag at this point. And so what I thought would be interesting from an iconic perspective is to represent this somewhat abstractly as plates stacked on top of each other. So that's why we have our 3 concentric circles here, is that they loosely represent 3 plates that are stacked in a place setting. So it's a little bit funny because I've done this in reverse order, or I'm starting to think about this in reverse order, where breakfast is your small meal on top and you would build it downward to dinner. It could go either way. That's another thing that I'm happy to take feedback about. What makes more sense, to build from the center out or to build from the outside in?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I feel like, some people eat less at dinner and more at breakfast.
Right.
But other people, maybe they don't eat breakfast and then they have like a big dinner or something.
Right.
It's
Which
kind of weird.
is technically not a good habit, right? Like we're supposed to start the day off with a good breakfast and then kind of work up from there. I don't adhere to those good habits, but that is something to think about. Yeah, because it's very easy to say, breakfast is a small meal, you just grab and go, but that's how I function. It's not how the rest of the world necessarily functions. But that was the idea here.
A lot of people are saying black is the best option. Reed, Katie, Aline, Roshan, all say black.
I'll say black. Okay,
no one has said white yet.
All right, so then we're gonna go with the color black then for our top. And in that case, I'm going to come over here and we'll work from this artboard. So the issue that I was having here is that we need to adjust some of the colors here just to make this a little bit more legible so we can see what's going on. So I need to remember how I set this up. I set it up where our entire object has been adjusted with its opacity. This is something that regardless of what application you're using, whether it's Photoshop or Illustrator or any of the others, you have to remember that if you've grouped objects into a folder in your layers, and this mostly applies to Photoshop, you have 2 abilities to address the opacity of those objects. You can either do the opacity of the entire group, or you can do the opacity of the individual objects. And that's often something I run into where I say, why can I not make all of my objects 100%? And it's because I've adjusted the group and I want to adjust the layers, or I've adjusted the layers and want to adjust the group. So
Katie and Roshan both think that center out feels more complete and it'll look better visually.
Excellent.
I agree with that.
You agree with that?
I feel like it's kind of like growing, but if it was like outside in, I don't know how I would, like what that would make me think of.
Right. So we'll do center out then. Yeah. So we're kind of off, I think, to a decent start here with that approach, right? So in this idea, we've purchased our Monday and our breakfast on Tuesday is currently in our cart. And so now it looks like everyone can probably see those circles there, and the idea is that we're filling those in as we add meals to our basket. So we've added 4 meals here. But yeah, I think that that's important. It's really important within a studio environment as well to get feedback from your peers, because it's especially when you really dive into something that you're getting excited about, it's really easy to kind of fall in love with what it is that you're creating and be really resistant to any sort of feedback or change because you've invested so much time. But we all know that feedback is part of the design process and really, really helpful.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So we have this panel here where we have our number of meals selected, and then we have that visual indicator of those. So then what we need below is basically our area where we can select all of the meals that we want to potentially add into this basket. So I think that a good way to do that, we could do that in a number of ways. We could just simply reflect the layout that we have on our landing screen where we just have one meal after another in cards. But the issue there is that that's a lot of scrolling that you have to do in order to actually find each of those meals. But what we can do is just simply create a smaller version of that card. Maybe we create a grid layout where there are 2 across, and then allow people to pick and choose that way, and that'll make it easier. We could still dive in and get that detailed view that I have right here for each of those meals, but our jumping off point just allows for more elements to be held within the screen at a given point. I guess let's talk about the rest of the overall layout here, and this also relates to those color choices that we've made. We're going to keep a new CTA now here at the bottom, which is our ability to continue on to that next step. So as we add meals, we're going to accumulate the price down here at the bottom. So in this case, we have 4 meals. Let's call it $45, for example. And then as we add meals, that price is going to increase, and then tapping on that button would then move us to the next step of our ordering process. So using those same repeat UI elements really helps us maintain consistency through the layout and a consistent experience as well.
Rita's asking, what happens when a user clicks that big arrow?
This big arrow? So this big arrow drops our layout back down to our main view right here. So, and we might get into some prototyping maybe tomorrow. We can play with what that looks like. But the idea is that you would tap on this button, it would then move upward, and the user would see that animation, that visual transition, and so then they would understand that an arrow pointing downward, in theory, is going to drop them out of that view. And so that's why I chose the arrow as opposed to an X, for instance. Like an X feels like a closeout where you would, if you were going to animate something that had an X, you would think about that interaction maybe being some sort of a zoom or some sort of an expand sort of view, similar to what we have here with our detailed view. You notice there I use an X because what we're doing is we're actually zooming into this view. So if we're going to collapse out of it, it makes more sense, I think, conceptually to use a close function because we're going to move in and out rather than up and down. But there's all sorts of different stylistic ways that you could represent this arrow as well. Maybe what makes more sense here is to actually just represent it as a caret. If I can grab both of my items here, we center those within that view. Maybe that makes more sense. So there's always a style pass, I think, that can happen visually after you get out of the kind of core functionality. We're in a funny situation where we're working both stylistically and functionally at the same time. But that's something that can definitely be noodled as you go further into the design process, using technical terms there. And another thing, we talked about these rounded corners yesterday. We're using those on our button when it's in a button state. I can go back here. And we only have one rounded corner there. But the idea was that we wanted to round our left and right corners so that it feels like more of a panel as opposed to a button that was going to stay stuck to the bottom of the layout. So I now want to remove those as we move into our other layout down here because this is now not functioning as a button, it's functioning as a title. So we'll go ahead. I'm just going to grab all 4 corners here and make them 0. I can simply do that by selecting this option right here because before I had affected only a couple of those corners. I want to, of course, make sure all of my corners are at 0. So the simple way to do that is just select this other option right here where we're grabbing all of our corners at once. And then XD is actually going to revert that back to 0 in this case, which makes our life super easy. Yeah.
Oh, it's chat and win time.
All right.
Yay. So everyone in the chat, if you haven't said anything yet, now is your chance, and you can win 100 free stickers from Sticker Mule. Let us know where you're watching from, and we will be right back. Back. Yay, let's see where everyone is from.
Oh, yeah. Got a lot of people in the chat.
Yeah. A lot of people are saying yay. Morocco. That's so cool. Illinois, Houston, Cincinnati, India, Pakistan. Oh my God, there's so many places. Brazil, Toronto.
Amy, I see you there. I know a couple people in the chat today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yay, hi, Amy.
I missed them yesterday, so my apologies.
Yay. Sacramento, England, Turkey, Texas, Cincinnati, LA, Iowa, St. Paul.
All over the place.
Oh, Alaska. I missed that one. Mexico. That's so crazy. Germany. Wow, we have people from all over the world. It's so
that's
cool.
great. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. Kenya. Oh my God. India. Texas. I feel like I've seen a lot of Texas people.
Big design community.
Yeah. Nigeria. That's so cool. We are in San Francisco, California.
We are.
It was sunny this morning, which was
Yeah, it was
nice.
not yesterday, so it's great to have that workout today.
Mm-hmm.
I was out in a t-shirt earlier.
Nice. India, Cincinnati. That's so cool.
Nice.
Yay.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Yes. We are still selecting a winner.
Too many people
Yeah,
today
too
to
many
quickly
people,
select a
yeah.
winner.
Hi, Allie and Reed.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let us know what your favorite meal of the day is. Do you like breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or snacks? I don't know. What would you say?
Which the favorite meal is?
Yeah,
I always look forward to lunch because it's my opportunity to go out and try different places around our studio when I'm not bringing leftovers from home. So I definitely look forward to lunch the most.
I like lunch too, and I like breakfast food as well.
Breakfast food is good.
Food is really good.
Yeah.
Yay. Oh, we have a winner, Aline Chavez. Yay, congratulations. Thank you to everyone in the chat for participating. Brunch. Oh yeah, brunch is really good.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
That was probably
on the
my
weekend
favorite.
with friends.
Yeah, and snacks. I would say snacks too.
Yeah.
So yeah, Aline, congratulations. You're going to be getting 100 free custom stickers from Sticker Mule. And then for anyone that did not win, if you head over to this link, I forgot what it's called. Thank you.
There we go.
Stickermule.com/Adobe Live 19, and you can get 10 stickers for only $1. So still a great deal.
It's an amazing deal,
Yes. See a lot of snacks and dinner and breakfast for dinner. Nice.
I miss the days of the junk cereal in the 90s where, Reese's peanut butter puffs or whatever were my favorite.
Those are good.
But those were good times.
I haven't had cereal in so long.
I know.
But I used to love cereal.
Yeah. It's harder as you become an adult to justify, I guess, eating cereal. But it's still a good guilty pleasure every once in a while.
True.
Nice.
Cool.
Should we continue?
Yeah.
All right, so I was talking about something. We were talking about just, building out our meals that we have here. Oh, and then our overall framework of how our button is going to function down here as well. So again, these are kind of good things to think about as we move through user flows, is how we got to the screen that we're currently looking at and how we're going to move on to the next screen. Because what that might do is present some sort of issue as we think about that overall framework that I keep stressing. So in this case, if we want to drop out of this view, we select this caret. If we want to fill this out and then move on, we're going to select from this button down here at the bottom. So I at this point, don't see any problems potentially, but we'll see as we move forward if I've created any issues with our user flow. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a grid of meals here. And again, I think this is a good time that we can use components. So we might actually stack multiple components here on top of each other so that we can make this process a little bit faster. So I'm going to create a rectangle here. We're going to make, or actually let's make it a perfect square. And I need to actually turn on my column grid that I built in the beginning so that I have a good understanding of how big my objects are within my view. So I'm just going to create a couple of these here just so that I can look at them in relation to each other, but I'm going to build the one on the left. So this is actually just going to be a mask for an image, so I can just make it any arbitrary color that I want to right now. We'll go get the image in just a moment, but then I want the name of my meal down here below. So we can do that by simply grabbing our text tool. I'm hitting T to do that, and then I'm going to actually click and drag to make a text area that's the same width as the image that I'm going to place above it. So we're currently centered right here with our text, and it's in white. So let's just quickly adjust that so that we're black. We'll do that. And we're centered. Maybe centered is going to work in this case. I often, for these situations, go left aligned with my text, but we can kind of see what happens as we build out this layout. And also turn on my baseline grid. Remember, I stressed the importance of that. Yeah, so we'll make sure that we're, whoops, we're building multiple text objects here. We'll make sure that we're on our baselines just so that everything is feeling really good. And now I'm just going to go over and grab one of our meal names from my handy dandy list right here. So we've got pink cauliflower flatbread. That actually sounds really good as well.
Wow. I don't think I've had cauliflower flatbread, but I tried cauliflower gnocchi from Trader Joe's.
Oh yeah.
And I was not a fan because I like the regular gnocchi that they have. And I was like, oh, maybe this cauliflower one would be good, but
not a good trade.
The texture.
We've done cauliflower pizza before. We use cauliflower in the crust.
Is that good?
It is really good. It's a kind of a chore to make because you have to squeeze all the water out as you make that flour essentially out of the cauliflower. So it's a little bit more involved as a process, but makes you feel nice and healthy as you eat it. I'm going to actually start adding some words to this title just so that we again, make sure that we have the ability to have 2 lines. Because of our layout size here, and this is something we talked about actually with our feedback on video players yesterday, is that if we're going to do titles below a grid layout like this, we start to run out of space pretty quickly. So in this case, because we're just going to show a picture of a meal, no one's going to know what that meal is just based on the picture, so we kind of need that title underneath. So we're going to say pink cauliflower flatbread with we'll say with arugula.
Ooh,
so that sounds really delicious. And now our leading is spaced all crazy. So I'm going to just bring that in a little bit. Again, using nice round numbers here to conform to our 10 pixel baseline grid. And this is looking pretty good. Sometimes what I do, again, as we nerd out on type here, is that I'll throw a G in just above a letter with an ascender just to see that if we have any sort of interaction between those 2 lines to make sure our leading works. But in this case, it looks like if our G and our capital A get close to each other, they're not going to interact, which is, in some cases you want them to. In interface design, less so much. So it looks like we're a little bit tight with our leading, but I think that will function properly in this case. So that looks good as a sort of card layout there. Maybe we could bring this a little bit closer. And now we have a nice sort of lockup for our individual card that we have there. I'm going to come over, so we'll take these and we'll just group them together so that we have them in a single unit. We have a lot of components going on, so we might go through and organize our layers in just a minute. But I now have a meal card, so I'm going to name this group. We're going to actually pull it further down within the layout here. And at this point, what I can do is actually turn off my baseline grid because we have our view kind of locked in there. I'm also going to turn off my column view because I don't need it. So I will hit my key command there if I can. And my laptop is not cooperating with me. So I'm just going to come over here to my view over here, and for some reason it doesn't think that I have a layout.
Everyone in the chat is loving your tip, Kristen and Johnny. And Kristen says you're so smart with typography.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Type is one of those things, there's so many books on it, and the beauty of, as a quick aside here, the beauty of typography is that it doesn't really get old. So I have a problem buying new books about new graphic design these days because, you know, as nice as it is to go through a printed object and a nicely designed book, books about graphic design are so immediately outdated when we look at contemporary work that unless you're buying something that is really a narrative on current graphic design that you could reference later, it's more difficult to make that investment. Whereas typography and books about typographers are really timeless. So I suggest filling your library with books about type, and you'll find some interesting things that you can then apply to your design as you move forward.
Do you have any recommendations for typography books?
There's one that I've had on my desk about the designer Jan Chickhold, and his last name is pronounced Chickhold, but looks like Tischhold, about his posters that he was doing during kind of the constructivist era of design. So that's the very kind of bold, geometric design style that we see, where we have words kind of intersecting each other at 45-degree lines in a way that's not quite, it looks like Swiss design, but it's a little bit more aggressive than Swiss design. So that book has been really interesting to look at. And then also interestingly designed books are fun to buy as well, which there's a lot more of those in contemporary culture as well. I have a really interesting book about the making of the film Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I bought purely because it was designed by Pentagram, and they did a really nice job with the way that they handled so much information within that book. So it's not about type, it's about something that has to do with artistry and filmmaking, but the typography within that book is extremely well handled.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to my meal images here and just grab one that I have kind of predetermined. So we have nice high resolution images here that we're just going to drop in. I'm going to make sure that it's in the same area as my card here. So we'll just pop open that folder, move some items around. And then remember, we have our mask over top. Then we have our image. I'm going to select both of those together and then go Shift-Command-M, and then we'll use that square as our mask. So we're a little bit funky here in terms of size. I'm going to bring this size down a little bit so that we actually fit within our card. And so we have a couple things going on here. We have an image that's over a white background, which actually doesn't go edge to edge, which is nice. So it looks right now like we've just taken a photo of this plate from over top. And we see these. I see these a lot, especially on Behance, where people have done case studies of individual apps that where they choose really nice photography, but that photography is often like the best case scenario of what they could expect from a particular project. Oftentimes, getting photography that is perfect from your client is not always accessible. It's difficult to get images that are 100% consistent, especially when you're shooting across multiple days. And actually, Amy, who's in the chat, is a photographer friend of mine who would attest to this, where you can set up a shot perfectly to take a picture of this meal and get the plate and all the plates that you're going to shoot that day to be exactly the same size. But then once you tear down that set and have to shoot their next series of meals, you might not be able to get exactly the same setup as you had before. So that's something that's very difficult. And so what we want to do from a design perspective is allow for different imagery to work within these scenarios so that we can still create a consistent look for our application, but not rely on everything looking exactly the same.
Yeah, that seems like it would be really hard to do. Just take pictures that have like the same look over multiple days. So
yeah,
I commend
very difficult.
all the photographers out there.
Shout out to our photographers out there. Also, so if we have this image right here and then maybe our next image, we kind of break out of our mask, like we do this. We just want to be sure that we've handled our interface in such a way that allows for those sorts of variations in our photography. So we've done that. And then one thing that I often do in cases like this, where we have a white background and then have a sort of square bounding box that we're putting behind it, is sometimes I will actually take another square that's the same size as our image there, and I'll actually place it, in this case, behind. We'll make it a very light gray. And then we can actually take this image right here, and maybe we'll drop its opacity ever so slightly. So where's our image? It's right here. Maybe we'll make its opacity 90%. And sometimes what that'll do, and it's not working so well in this case, but sometimes what that'll do is allow that background to kind of come in over top. We can also play with that by putting this square over top and giving it an opacity of like 10 or 20%. But that'll kind of allude to the fact that there is a box here. But in this case, because this imagery is so bright and contrasty, it's not going to work as well in this situation. So we've created this card. I think I still want to treat this like a card, like what we had on our landing view. So I will now come in and create another rectangle behind.
Hey, Kathleen. Kathleen's in the chat from Kathleen Illustrated that we had happy hour with yesterday.
Oh, hi, Kathleen. Good to see you.
Yes. And hello, Mohammed and Destiny.
Everyone's joining in.
Yes.
I'm going to quickly create a card here in the background.
So Marc, I wanted to ask you about your business and how you kind of got started, like how you started your business and maybe like what inspired you to start a business, because that's really cool and really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, we can kind of start from the beginning. So Rainfall was actually born out of a lot of freelance work that I was doing after hours. So people call that a number of things these days, whether it's your side hustle or whatever else you have going on. I was participating in a lot of I would call those extracurricular projects at that time, just to explore my creativity and participate in client work that was somewhat unrelated to the work that I was doing in my day job. So in my day job, I was doing a lot of this sort of UI, UX work, functioning as a design director as well. So doing actual hands-on design, but then also working with a team of people as well that were working on various projects. So kind of bouncing around, doing a bunch of different things. And what I found is over time, I was being pulled away from the actual work that we were creating, just so that I could find time to manage clients and manage the projects that we were working on. And so I wanted that opportunity to really go back to creating more work as part of my everyday function. And so that's where Rainfall was born out of, was those projects that were after hours, then becoming my full-time focus and really getting to work with clients. A lot of them at that stage were early stage startups. So working with clients in their very beginnings, trying to figure out what their identities were. If they had a product as part of their offering, trying to figure out what their product looked like, how their product functioned. So there's a couple of case studies that you can actually see on my Behance profile for Atlas is one of them. Freight Hub is another one. We were there at the very beginning, starting with brand identity, and then with Atlas, we iterated on their product for 2 or 3 years, just doing constant updates. Yeah, user testing, understanding how people were engaging with the platform, all of that sort of process that you would do in kind of a typical design studio. We were doing with them, really as a kind of tight-knit group. So that's where Rainfall was born out of. And then over time, we just, word of mouth, through those clients, we started building up our client roster a little bit more.
I was about to ask, like, how was it difficult to find new clients, like once you established yourself as Rainfall?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most difficult part of any design business. You can't just open the door and put a sign on it and say, walk in, is welcome. Deal flow is, I wish. Deal flow is probably the hardest part and the most stressful part of the design business as well. So, and I've talked to a number of people who are quite experienced in starting companies in the design industry, mostly to just ask them what growth looked like over time. Did they start out as one person or 2 people? And what was that moment where they then became a gigantic studio? Some people have run companies of 50, 60, 70 people. There's a lot of design agencies out there that are hundreds of people. And so understanding what that growth looked like was really interesting from my perspective, because it allowed me to get a look behind the curtain as to what I should look out for as a business owner for opportunities to grow as well. And so really what you need to start is some sort of anchor client that really believes in the work that you're doing and is willing to grow their business alongside your business as well. So somewhat of an understanding that as they have more needs, maybe they're a startup and that they're going to get more funding, that they'll try to work with you as best that they can as you grow your business alongside theirs. If you start and you don't have any clients, that's a little bit more of a difficult position to be in because you have a lot of opportunity to create work, but there aren't specific projects coming in, and so it's a little bit more difficult to get started. But the one thing that we kind of ran into as we were working through starting Rainfall was always fighting with having a lot of client work to do, but then really wanting to focus on our own structure as well as a company, or as building that company. And that was a constant push-pull. Sometimes you wish that you had less client work so that you could really focus on business growth, and then that happens, and you're like, oh, I wish we had more client work so that we could continue to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So it's a constant tug of war, and honestly, a lot of that is solved through just working a lot, but over time it becomes a little bit more natural, and you start to build all the materials that you need on a daily basis. There are a lot of elements that are involved in running a studio, from creating contracts and having relationships with lawyers to just having proposal presentations ready to go so that you have, like I mentioned at the top, some sort of nice presentation that you can put all of your costs in so that it looks like you're presenting yourself professionally. But it's definitely a challenge.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that with us.
So what I've been doing is just playing with this kind of card height that we have going on here. I'm going to turn on my grid again, see where I am. So I've moved a couple of items around here where you see we're not falling quite on our grid, and I think that the reason for that is that our image is actually smaller than the box that it was in. So now we are A-okay there, and let me turn the grid back on, put that right on the grid, and our height, we're going to make 240. So again, using nice big even numbers just makes this an easier layout to create. So we have a constant margin here around our image, and what that allows us to do is create a nice layout here where our type is left aligned with that image. And that's less apparent in this particular case because our image has a white background, and that's why I made this card background kind of a light gray for the moment, is to just see how everything's lining up. But that's always a constant tug of war that I have personally when designing with cards. I have this inset text here, and then maybe I want to add some sort of title up here. It's always a question that I ask myself internally is like, should this title align with the type down below, or should I align it with the cards? And it's about 50-50 as to what I do. It just depends on how I'm feeling that particular day. But it doesn't matter. I've designed hundreds of these, and every single time I do it, I have the same issue. So that part doesn't necessarily get easier with experience. I'm going to add another shadow down here at the bottom. I think what we were using yesterday was a 20 pixel blur and a 10 pixel offset. So now we have a pretty big kind of blur around our cards. That is going to present an issue that we noticed yesterday with if we make this card a component and then try to put another card next to it, our shadows are going to start to interact. So that's something that I'm a little bit worried about right here. So I'm actually going to tone this down, maybe make it a 5 pixel offset, and maybe we'll make it a 10 pixel blur. And then it's a little bit intense on my screen, so I want to now take this and maybe knock it down to 5% opacity. We now have a weird interaction with our colors, but this gray color was just purely a placeholder. So I'm going to make that white, and now we have a nice card. It's probably not going to show up as nice in the video that we can see here, but
it's a little hard to see, but I can see it on your screen.
So maybe we'll play with that a little bit as we move forward here. But so we have our card, we have our title, we have our image. But remember, another big part of this is that donation aspect, and the idea that depending on which meal you select, might have a bigger implication in terms of that meal that you're donating. So this is Flatbread, it's clearly not from our image. We'll just have to trust that we have the right image there. But flatbread might be something that's worth, a full meal or something with our donation. So I'm actually going to make my life a little bit easier by coming up here and grabbing this piece of text, and then I'm going to paste it right in place.
So there's about 35 minutes left until we're going to review your design submissions for the XD Daily Creative Challenge. So if you've been working on it, please submit them in our design feedback channel on Discord, and we will review them and give you live feedback. And even if you're not caught up to today's challenge, that's totally fine. You can submit what you've worked on so far, and we will be looking over them. And I'm really excited to see everyone's submissions because they're all amazing.
Awesome, yeah, can't wait. All right, so we now have our card set up here, and we have our title, and then we have our calories plus our meal. So maybe we'll say this is actually going to donate one meal when you purchase it. So now, again, we have this sort of hierarchy issue that we talked about a little bit with our detailed view. But because we're using gray as our typeface here, and we've actually set it off from our text that's above by a couple grid lines, I think that we're going to be okay. We might, we're at size 20 here, which we talked about this a little bit in feedback. On mobile apps, you want to make sure that your text doesn't get too small. It's really easy to do that when you realize that you don't have much room for your layout, and you want to make room for a lot of elements that your type might get too small. But in this case, I think it might be okay. What we might do is actually drop it to 18, just to give ourselves a little bit more contrast. And the beauty of these really high-resolution phone screens nowadays is that you can read pretty small type fairly easily. So I'm going to break my rules a little bit as we move forward, just to kind of get this layout to work a little bit better. All right, so we have our card there. I think that that's looking pretty good. And now what we want to do is just put a bunch on the screen so that we have a filled out layout here. So I'm going to delete my other card. I've got my card right here as a group, and then I'm going to make it a component. So we'll just make that. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my key commands today. There we go.
Yeah, that's Command K, right?
It is, yes. Command K makes it a component. Again, my trick for this is to come up to the help menu and just start typing component, and then it will obviously help you find that nice and easily here.
Nice.
So if you kind of know what it is that you're looking for, it's a really nice trick to find that option.
Nice.
And that's something that I do quite often within Adobe is, there's just so many menu options that it's hard to remember.
Yeah, I do that on Photoshop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. On XD, there's a plugin to help with keyboard shortcuts, and it's called Keyboard Shortcuts.
All right.
And basically, it's like a library of all the keyboard shortcuts you would need. So you can type in like component, and then it'll say like what the command or like keyboard shortcut options are. So it's another
That's awesome.
way to do that. Yeah. Love plugins.
There was a woman that used to work for my father who had, my dad's an architect, and so they used really complicated CAD software. There's a million different options, and there's menu panels and all of that, and so what she used to do was actually print out what the menus looked like and right next to them what all the commands were, and then they were taped to the side of her monitor. So that was the kind of lo-fi early 2000s way of doing that.
That's smart though.
Yeah.
Just to have like the reference right here.
Yeah, I think that when I was in college, we used to do that with Illustrator in particular. We were only using pretty much Illustrator and InDesign in college, and there were so many tools that we would print out what each one was and then make reference sheets for ourselves.
Nice.
But nowadays we have so many other digital tools available to us.
True. Destiny is asking, would you suggest nothing below 12-point font for mobile?
On mobile, I often suggest nothing below 20 or 24, depending on the typeface, right? So some typefaces, size 20 might appear visually larger than a different typeface at size 20. But it also depends on the actual pixel dimensions, right? So back when we used to design for iOS in Photoshop, there's kind of a whole progression that happened. So when we had the initial, whatever it was called, was it the iPhone 1? The first version of the iPhone, the iPhone 3G, I guess, where we were designing apps, you would design it at what was a 72 DPI, I believe, in those days. And so then, yeah, your smallest typeface would be size 12. But then when we went to the Retina display on the iPhone, well, I'm not going to name products, the next iPhone, we had to basically double that resolution. So what that meant was that all of our typefaces were then double size. So I still kind of mentally exist within that headspace of, because our pixel dimensions are so large for our artboards, everything is kind of double what you would expect if you were designing the same thing in print. So I believe that 20 is where I work now. If you were designing something for a mobile layout and maybe your artboard size was a width of 375 pixels, then you would probably use 12 as your minimum. But here, because we're at that iPhone 10 size, we're a gigantic screen. So that's what's driving the type of size sizes here. Yeah. So I've got my two components here. Let's just, for the sake of visual difference, swap out some of the elements here. So we've got another plate. And this is a good example of using an image. Yeah, using an image that's art directed in a completely different way here. So this is a sandwich. I know that a lot of their stuff is gluten-free and vegan, as I mentioned. So
I was gonna say this. I feel like this is vegan.
Yeah,
but I don't know what it is.
That looks really vegan. Yeah,
it looks like
there's avocado for sure, and then probably a gluten-free bread, and then maybe
like a
peppers?
Vegan beef.
Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
We can hunt through our descriptions and see if we can find something that matches. So this is where I get really into the nitty-gritty of like, there's a weird little section of the image that's showing up. Now I'm moving my background. Little section of the image, so we just like to make sure that we have a nice crop. But you can see, because we're creating a consistent card layout here, even though these images are quite different, they still function somewhat well together. And that's something where a lot of these images, especially as we were to move into the build of this application, those are going to be driven by a database somewhere and just loaded in automatically. We might not be able to determine what that image is going to look like when it's coming into the app. So we want to make a few adjustments to our design to allow for that dynamic content to still look good. You know, as a designer of this, obviously you would want to set guidelines for your client and say, okay, look, your photography should be taken top down. Maybe everything should have a background so we have a consistent look, but those aren't always decisions that we can take part in. So we'll just change out some of the information here. We'll call this maybe half a meal. Maybe this is a little bit more calorie intense. And then let's just grab, again, another arbitrary. Let's see if I have a meal that looks like it makes sense with that name. I don't think that I do. So we will do kimchi banh mi as our title here, because I think what might work with this. Yeah. So now we have something here that's just nice to talk about from a design perspective, where we have one title that is single line and then one title that is double line. And as a young designer, this used to stress me out to no end, because I would look at these layouts and think, okay, how do we create consistency even though we have titles that are completely different sizes? So there are two schools of thought as far as how we create this layout with our grid. One is to say that this piece of text here is always going to be linked in terms of its physical space with the title above it. So basically, if we were to make this 3 lines, then it would just continue to push down this calorie count plus this meal count. Or we can say, look, what we're going to do is always lock this text to the bottom of our card, and then always lock this text to a certain distance from our image. And then that way, you know, this is going to create this larger gap here. And I think that from a design perspective, and especially because we're in an order flow here, it makes a lot of sense to have this information stay in a consistent position. So we're going to be okay with the fact that our title here has a big gap between the actual title and the calorie count below. So now we have our 2 cards, which we have as individual components over here. What I can then come in and do is grab both of those and actually make those both a component. So we're now nesting the components, and I'm purely doing that so that I can do a repeat grid and then have a bunch of these cards show themselves within this layout, which is really nice. So really nice and handy with XD is that I didn't have to lay out each of those individual cards, and then if I need to change any of them, what I can actually do is come back and just purely change the layout of my first card, which is my master, and it will adjust everything. So even though I have those nested components, we still adhere to our master component, which is really nice.
That's so cool. This is like my favorite new feature on XD is components.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the past, if I would do a repeat grid and then I wanted to change something, I would have to like undo the repeat grid or just start over.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time, but now with components, you can just change one thing and then...
It's so handy.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially, I mentioned I dated myself with coming from the days of designing in Photoshop. The beauty of XD is that it's meant for this type of design where you're designing big systems.
Yeah.
So having those, the ability to affect components is really good. And that actually took me a while to get used to, was this thinking in terms of software functionality as allowing me to create components. Because visually, yes, I would create big PSDs that would have a bunch of components on them that I would then use as my reference point for all of my designs, but having all of that automated is just so much simpler. All right, so we now have our list of potential meals that we could theoretically tap on to add to our kind of ongoing, let's call it a table up here. That's a nice kind of conceptual name because we have those plates as icons. But we need some sort of way to indicate that we've selected one of these options. And so what's a little bit difficult about this approach is that it'd be very easy to create a selected state for one of these items that's just on-off, right? We could put a check mark up here in the corner. Maybe we put a ring around it that says that it's been selected. But what that doesn't allow me to do is then select the same meal multiple times, which we might allow in this case. So maybe I want to eat 100% pink cauliflower flatbread with arugula every meal of the week. And I think we want to allow our users to do that, even if that's a little bit of a funky approach. You asked earlier what my favorite meal of the week is. And I go to this place for tacos probably 3 or 4 times a week. It's a little bit unhappy.
What taco place?
It's actually a chain in Seattle called Taco Del Mar. So I actually don't get tacos. I get their taco salad because it comes in the tortilla bowl, and I just love eating that so that I don't have to order chips. I can just order the taco salad. And I've had to tone it down with how often I go in there because it's such an easy option, really quick, and really nice people there. But so if you're like me and you like to eat the same thing for lunch multiple times a week, we want to be able to order more. So we have to think about this for a second, how I want to do this. So there's a number of typical paradigms for how you would select a multiple quantity of an item within an order flow. One would be simply for me to tap on this, and it would give me a button that would allow me to add it to my table, and then some sort of quantity picker next to it. So that's one option. I'm thinking about that now because we have this detailed view. So if I'm going to tap on this card, what's going to happen is that it's going to want to take me to this detailed view. So how do we create some sort of intermediate state where we can very easily add one of these items to our table without having to kind of drop into this detailed view and create an excess number of interactions? And it's something that I think click count or tap count is relevant in a lot of cases. We do want to make things easier for our user. I don't always like to benchmark the designs that we do based on that. If we're making the overall experience easier, but it takes one extra click or one extra tap, I think that that's perfectly fine. But with mobile apps especially, what I want to do is really think about how we can use gesture to our advantage. So maybe the natural gesture that we want to encourage here is dragging these items up onto our table, and what that'll do is trigger some sort of ability to adjust our quantity. So let's assume that, and we'll work through it and see if that works or if that doesn't work. So let's see. So the way that I like to do these sorts of processes is to just, again, create another artboard. And I'm going to grab this component here. And now we've kind of run into a funny thing where I want to pull this actually out of this particular view. So I need to come into my components, grab one of my meal cards, and I'm going to actually copy that and then move out of our repeat grid and then paste it. So I've got a duplicate meal card over top of our card here. So if I turn it on and off, you won't be able to see. So what I want to do is actually, for illustration's sake, grab that component that I just pasted right there and move it up so that it's somewhat overlapping with this yellow bar up top. So at this point, what we're simulating is a user tapping or holding and dragging this particular meal up into this bar up at the top. Now, as that happens, we again want to focus our user on whatever it is that they're doing at that particular location. So that means that as I'm dragging, we need to think about what's irrelevant to us. So what's irrelevant to us at that point is all of this information and all of these meals that are behind our view. So what that means is I'm going to take this repeat grid and I'm going to turn its opacity down to 20%. So we've now selected our individual item. That becomes all important. The ability to continue probably also goes away at this point. But I'm also thinking that it's kind of interesting to be able to see our price as we drop this meal, because that's going to be immediately relevant to me once I've dropped a meal.
So it would like add the price of whatever you're dragging in automatically, like as you add meals.
And that's actually interesting because I'm realizing that we don't have a price associated with this particular card, but I think that we're okay on that for now. Let's assume that we are working within a framework of how much a week's worth of meals cost. Maybe we'll come back to that later. Let's just worry about functionality for this particular interaction. But so we're going to drop this into that upper bar. Right now, that upper bar feels a little bit like it's a little bit too narrow to accept this card. So what we might do is actually grab this and make it a little bit taller in the case that you've actually decided to drag something in there. And we talked a little bit yesterday about learned behaviors. This is something that might have to be a little bit more of a learned behavior, the fact that you can tap and drag. But I think that that's something that's simple enough that we could teach it in an onboarding screen. Just, hey, simply drag and drop the meals that you want into your basket. And you read it once and you probably have learned it from there.
So the yellow bar would kind of like animate, like open as you're dragging it and then like close. Cool.
And then, I think that there's all sorts of fun little design flourishes that we could add as well that I won't go into at this point, but we could have little hint text that says drop here. We could also maybe add some sort of a ring around this box. So I can just demonstrate that quickly here by maybe that ring is just a slightly darker yellow. Actually, and that's what I'm going to want to turn into my border. Slightly darker yellow. We'll make this 5 pixels in width. And then we're going to drop this. So kind of your standard sort of when you drop something into a particular area on a site or in a mobile app, it darkens it to make it look a little bit deeper.
We have a question from Aline. Is there a way to justify text in Adobe XD?
To justify, like left and right justify?
I think that's what you mean. So yes.
Is there?
I think so.
You know better than I do.
Well, I don't have anything on my XD, but I think if you select a text box. Oh.
I don't know that there is.
I feel like this up here, that would work. I feel like I've used that before too. I
think so basically what we're trying to do is have this text go edge to edge, where if I were to type some random text here, what would happen is that we share the same left and right edge. Is that what we're talking about with justifying type?
Maybe not then. Maybe I'm just thinking of left aligning, like aligning text with something else, and you can hit one of those top.
Oh yeah, buttons. for left aligning, like if I had my alignment wrong here and I selected both of these options.
That's what I'm thinking of. But I don't know if that's what you're asking, Aline. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what you mean. But
yeah, if we're talking about aligning text kind of like a newspaper column where the text has the same left and right edge, that's again where we get into typography and legibility. So what happens, the issue with justifying text on both the left and the right is that it creates inconsistent gaps in those spaces in between those words. And so those are often called rivers in typography, where if you were to squint at the page, or another way to do it is to flip a page upside down, it creates these sort of running areas of negative space, which actually make it a little bit more difficult to read because your eye doesn't
That's so interesting.
go fluidly from one object to the next. So typically in traditional type design, and I definitely fall on the traditional end of the spectrum for how I treat type and how I handle type, we stay away from doing that justification, especially when we look at interactive layouts like websites and whatnot. Those are just not handled that well in browser. So it's much more legible to give your user left-aligned text, especially for longer format. So longer format, left-aligned text is really good. Centering works really well for headlines and shorter format because it's easier for your eye to read when there's just a little bit of it. Otherwise, you don't know where to go back.
Yeah, I think I heard that 3 lines is like a good point for like centering text, like no more than 3 lines. If it's longer, then you should do left-aligned.
Yeah, that's a good rule to follow. And then there's also rules for how many words per line are typically legible as well. So those are, of course, the rules that you can then go in and break as you learn them. But it's nice to understand those rules as well.
Keita has a question for you. What are good typography resources a designer could use to get a better sense of type?
Yeah, so I learned all of my typography foundation on a letterpress. So we had in my college, we had a letterpress studio, which is where you actually lay the type out, whether it's wood or whether it's metal, and you're printing it onto a page.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I really recommend it if there is a letterpress opportunity in your town to go take a class there and see if you can engage with that process. Because what that teaches you are not only all the terms that are related to typography, and so then it allows you to use those terms even within the digital space, but it allows you to see how type was originally handled and why we have the rules that we do. So a big thing that you learn in design school is that you don't warp or stretch typography unless you really have a meaning to do so. And the reason is because with metal type, you really can't warp or stretch it. But then you start to explore ways that, okay, maybe conceptually I want text that looks like it's waving in the wind. So what I might do is print my text onto a page, warp the page, photograph the page, and now I've warped text without warping text. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, really fun ways to play with typography from that perspective. But that's where you get all of that type terminology, where we call the distance between the lines leading, is because when you're setting metal type, it's a literal lead bar that you're putting in between those lines.
Oh my God, I get it.
Yeah.
I never got it before.
Yeah, that's what, when I was
That's awesome.
when I was growing up and getting interested in design, you'd call it leading, right? Because it looks like that would be the way that you pronounce it, but it's lead because it was literal lead that you were using with your typography. Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
There's a couple like rapid fire type questions from Keita. Do you prefer uppercase for buttons or capitalize? I think like title case.
That depends on a million different things, but typically I prefer, actually it's kind of more of a brand question, but I tend to prefer title case or lowercase for buttons. And that gets into kind of another piece of typographic history, I guess, or information, is that when you have large capital letters that are in a block, so we have this title here, for instance, in the top of our layout, you'll notice that the further that we zoom out from that block, the more and more that text is going to look like just simply a rectangle to our viewer. But the moment that we take that text and then convert it to standard case or title case, each of those individual words have a shape to them. And so if you're looking for a particular word, for instance, maybe you're looking for the word continue, that's going to have a shape that your mind is going to understand, even if it's subconsciously, a little bit more quickly than it's going to understand that same word set in caps. So that's why if you look at informational signage or directional signage, more so in Europe than in the US, you'll see a lot of informational signage is set in title case or set in sentence case because it's much quicker for people to comprehend.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. I did see the Elements of Typographic Style pulled up there as a book option. That is actually a great resource as well. So really understanding grids and all the terminology related to type, understanding what an ascender is, that part that goes kind of above the rest of your letters within a text block, the descender, which is anything that falls below the baseline. All of those sorts of elements are really good to understand so that you can talk about type with
I
people.
need to read that book because I don't know all the little terms. I've like learned them throughout being on Adobe Live because a lot of the guests know those terms because they have like graphic design backgrounds, but I don't have a graphic design background, so I'm like picking up little things here and there, but it's so fascinating to me, so I definitely need to check that out. Thank you to Colleen for posting that book.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, it's really interesting to understand those various elements as it pertains to working with type because it gives you a vocabulary that you can then say there's something weird about this layout or there's something I really like about this layout, and what is it that I like about that that element. Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to jump back into where we were. So I have created this border here that indicates that we're about to drop something in. Again, we have kind of a color issue here with our contrast, so I'm going to make it a little bit darker. There, so we now indicate that we're about to drop this item into our table or onto our table. So when we do that, what's going to happen is that we then want to be able to easily select the quantity of this particular item that we've added into this bar. So I think what would be a fun way to do that is to use the same component that we created when we were talking about skipping a meal and then donating as part of that process, where we could say, okay, you're adding the pink cauliflower flatbread with arugula. How many of those do you want to add? You could simply drag over and say, I want 4 of them, tap, and then you're done with that process. So let's think about how we want to do that. I'm going to create another artboard. So what this artboard does is it purely illustrates this process. And in the days before prototyping with all of these tools, what we used to do when we were working in Photoshop is actually create, we called them flip books of our interactions, where I would literally make multiple versions of this artboard with this object getting closer and closer into the table there. So glad those days are over. But yeah, so we would create these really long presentations where you could flip through them, see that animation happening, and that made it easier for our clients to comprehend what that interaction was.
Oh my God.
So yeah. All right, so in this case, we've now added this item. We are no longer dragging it, so we don't need to indicate that it is there. We're still focused on this interaction, so I'm going to keep these items in the background pushed visually backwards. But now what I want to do is, because we're in the middle of this process, we've added this item. We might want the ability to clear this item, and then we want to be able to adjust its quantity as well. So we've got a little bit of a user experience dilemma is the wrong word, but a little bit of a challenge to solve for ourselves here. So I'm just grouping these elements because what I think I want to do is turn them off, because it's not as relevant to what we're doing. Actually, you know what? It's quite relevant to what we're doing, because it's going to tell us how many meals we've added to our day. So what I'm going to do is actually create a layout here where we're going to build out this panel a little bit vertically. So we have those items grouped. I'm going to take our text that we have here and then simply put it right here. So we're going to give ourselves a little bit more width.
Hey, Huxel and Larry, thank you for joining us.
Welcome. All right, so we've now added that. We're going to want the ability to clear potentially, so I might add that and then decide that I don't want it. We can do that in a couple of ways. We can have it so that we set our quantity to 0. Maybe we have a remove function right over to the right. That then becomes, again, somewhat problematic when we have to deal with a longer title that might run onto 2 lines in this scenario. So let's get the overall layout going, and then we can look at it a little bit more in terms of the functionality. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit more height, and then I'm going to come over and find that component that we had here that I've called slider, which is actually a variation on that original button that we created that said skip. So you can see what you can do with components here, where you can add a ton of variation to it to stack on functionality, which is nice.
So for those just joining us, do you want to do like a quick recap of what project you're working on, just so people
Sure.
kind of know?
So we are doing an application for a provider of pre-prepared meals that are in the, for a client of ours that's in the healthy eating and healthy living space. So these are mostly vegan and gluten-free meals that come to their customers pre-packaged and pre-labeled, so breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And they're just simply ready to eat. And so what this client is trying to do is actually continue their work in doing social good and linking the meals that they sell to meal donations to people in need. So we can kind of think about that idea as healthy body, healthy mind, and healthy soul. So really trying to take those indulgences that you have, because purchasing pre-prepared meals is an indulgence that not everyone can afford or participate in. So really trying to extend that for those people who are more fortunate and able to participate in this program, to allow them to give back in some sort of fashion.
Nice. I like that tagline, the healthy mind, healthy body, healthy soul.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of conceptual
I feel like that would be
framework to think
cool
about
for
it.
like this brand, like for their splash screen. Like I would imagine that kind of like setting the tone for this app.
Yeah, it's a nice framework, a nice slogan in order to think about them. Yeah. So I'm just changing this component here to be our confirmation. And so we're a little bit more out there with our design here, and that's something, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, we as a studio really try to push our boundaries as far as we can in our first passes, and then what we do is as we test and as we speak with our clients, we pull it back in a little bit. So we have a component here that's a little bit, I would consider a little bit more edgy in terms of its functionality, where we're combining a slider with a confirmation. But I think that makes the overall engagement a little bit more interesting than it might be to simply have a quantity box with a left and a right arrow to increase or decrease that quantity. So we're going to start at 1 as our option there, and then you would then slide this to increase your quantity. One little trick that I was thinking about this morning that I bet a lot of people do this, but I thought I'd share anyway, is that if I want to center a piece of text within an area where I can't necessarily use the tools that we have up here, the way that I often do that is by creating a text area, so something where I can actually expand the area that my text is in. I make sure that my text is set to centered here within that area, and then what I can do, just to zoom in here, is I can then, and I hold down Option to expand on both sides. What I can do is actually drag this area over so that it aligns with my 3 items here, and then drag this over so that it aligns with the edge of my button. And what that'll allow me to do is actually center this particular piece of text between this interface element and the edge.
That's such a cool trick.
It's kind of a fun little approach that I've had, because there's really no other way to determine that space.
You have like the best tips and tricks for typography and
all from
spacing and
just
everything.
working for a long time, you start to develop those tricks regardless of whatever it is that you're using. Another way to do this, of course, is to draw an object that's the width that we need it to be, grab both of those items, and then we can use our centering tool there. That's kind of the way that I was originally taught when I was first out of school. But yeah, a lot of these tips and tricks just come from working a long time and trying to work quickly and figuring out various methods for speeding up your process.
Nice.
And
So there's about 3 minutes left until we're going to review your designs in Discord. So if you've been working on something for the XD Daily Creative Challenge, be sure to post that on the design feedback channel on Discord, and we'll be taking a look in about 3 minutes.
Can't wait. All right, so here I'm just going to solve a few hierarchy issues that we have happening. There's a lot of small text here. Really what's important, as much as this component is important, is that this title here is important as well. So I'm going to boost that up so that we actually match the size that we have, not on our detailed view, but probably on our cards here. And I don't remember what size that is. That is size 30 and the book weight. So again, a good opportunity here to be building styles as I'm working through these issues will make it quicker to actually have consistency. But that has to do with your particular workflow. And usually what I like to do is work really quickly, throw a bunch of ideas out, and then refine as we move forward, just because if we get too involved in the details from the beginning, we might not actually solve the bigger issues of user flow. We might have a really nicely designed product, but our product might not function as well, which is, yeah.
Sorry, Kita's asking a question. What school did you attend? It sounds really technically beneficial, and it does.
I went to University of Delaware, which is actually a school that is in Delaware, and their big claim to fame is that they are heavily funded by grants from the DuPont family, which is they create chemicals and materials for any number of things. So they create Gore-Tex, which is that material that rainproof jackets are made out of. So big science school, lots of engineering technology comes out of that school, but they have a tiny little school within their university, which is their School of Art that does visual communications and fine art and any number of other careers within that. And it's a really good environment to engage with other people that are similarly minded and that they want to go to a large university and get a really broad education, but at the same time have a really detailed education of design. So at that time, which was a while ago, it was very heavily focused on graphic design, and that has evolved to now include UX as well.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. I can plug the Visual Communications School at the University of Delaware. It's actually an excellent program. They cover advertising, graphic design, and they really promote a program of exploring whatever creativity it is that you're interested in, whether that's animation or photography, and helping you still combine all of those skills into a marketable skill as you move forward and start actually looking for work. So they have a great network of alumni as well,
really important.
which is really important. Yeah.
How did you find out about that school or that program?
That I found out about through, I think, just searching online, and ultimately found it. Really good program, really competitive program, and they were doing work that looked visually interesting to me, so that's why I went there.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yay. Oh, it's time to look at some designs. Yay. So I'm going to hop over to Discord and see some feedback going on, which is amazing. We have a great community on our Discord channel, and I think the bit.ly to join was /XD in capital letters. Oh, yay. Thank you. XD Discord. So if you head over to this link, you can join our Discord, and you just joined.
I did. You can find me in Discord.
Yay. And we have some mentors to giving feedback, and also the community, which is really, really awesome to see. So I appreciate everyone giving feedback. And let's take a look at these designs.
All right.
Cool.
Look at that.
First one is from Nile. This looks really nice.
Yeah. Nice color palette.
Yes, okay. Let's see. One thing I would say really quickly is it's kind of hard to read. Maybe I can turn my brightness up. But the white text against the light background is a little hard to read, so I would maybe make that a darker color.
Yeah, and we've seen that issue with some of the stuff that I've been working on here as well, with using that yellow and then trying to push items into the background. There's also the whole approach to accessibility as we move forward with functional design that is often difficult to comply with, because it really gives us a limited set of colors that we can use and contrast ratios that we can use, but that is important, especially as those, not only as the rules become more stringent, but as we try to be more inclusive with the designs that we create.
There's also a great plugin, I can talk about it really fast, on XD called Stark. And so you can do like check contrast. So if you have color in a background, and it'll let you know if it like passes these, I'm not sure what these stand for, but I think like accessibility.
These are Canadian, accessibility standards, I believe. So Canada has a system or a set of guidelines that they call the WCAG, which is the set of guidelines that digital products have to adhere to if you're going to be doing business in Canada. And so that's what sets those really strong contrast guidelines for the products that we create. So
Yay. So,
less relevant in
yeah.
the US, but we should aspire to be as inclusive as
Yes.
possible. And so
I agree.
since Canada's leading the charge, I usually look to them for those guidelines.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yay. So yeah, I would recommend checking this out. It's called Stark. It's a great plugin. And they also do colorblind simulation, sorry. So it's pretty cool. You can change this. I just have the word text, so you can't really, it doesn't change much. But if you have like colors,
That's
you
really
can
interesting.
do all these different types and see how it would look. And it's very interesting because you can't really imagine what you're designing would look like to a person that has color blindness. But if you use this, you can kind of get a better idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, yes. Okay, so sorry, let's continue with this. Ooh,
And it might have been you in the Discord that was talking about the alignment of those titles. See, that's the issue that I always have. Where do those titles go? Do they align with the text so you have one line, or do they align with the cards? And often it's just a choice of however you feel. So here I think I would look at the type size we talked about. So especially the description that we have under the trouble with you is getting a little bit small and more difficult to read. And so I would consider maybe that needs to pull out of that asset, and you need to create something that's more of a card or more of a lockup that contains multiple assets so that you can make that typography bigger than it currently is. And that's just something that comes with checking it on your phone as you design through it, and just experience with designing a lot of applications over time.
Yeah, I think, a card would look cool, kind of similar to what you were designing.
And you have these strong rounded corners too, which really would apply themselves nicely to a card type layout.
Yeah, great. Cool. I like how you have, like, this is a different shape than what you have in theaters. It kind of like separates that, which is nice. And then I like how you included this little thing peeking out so you can kind of know to drag through.
Yeah, really nice alternative to using the dots that are so standard.
Yeah.
It's just showing that there's a little bit off screen.
Let's see where I can click. Ooh,
Nice navigation
nice.
there.
Yeah, this is cool.
Making use of that background blur.
Yeah. Awesome. Ooh,
There we
nice.
go. Movies.
Popular movies.
Yeah, so I think I would look, at the size of those elements, make sure that we make those nice and clickable, and then also that you have two different CTAs there. It's often really helpful to have two different CTAs that are performing two different functions look visually different, so that it's very apparent to the user what it is that you're allowing them to do. And that's something where working through this process, just having a friend that you can bounce the design off of, or people like us that you can bounce the design off of and say, does this make sense to you? Or if I asked you to watch this video, where would you go to perform that function? So here, that might be that arrow in the center. It might be the watch it button over on the right-hand side. I think just having those considerations it will help as you work through this process. But the overall layout and the kind of grid structure that you have set up is really going to lend itself nicely to whatever those modifications are that need to be made from a functionality perspective.
Yeah, I think having this play button here would kind of indicate to watch it, or I guess rent. I don't know. Never mind.
That's true. There are kind of three
renting
different.
could also be watching it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with Mark where you should maybe make, like right here you have rent it in red. It still kind of looks the same, like from a quick glance. So maybe
it's harder for me to see from further away.
But I don't know. You could make one like outlined, but I don't know how well it would show against a picture. So there's like a lot of different variations. I think someone posted in Discord something, I think it was here, where this, like primary and secondary action buttons. So I think from Cars has been great in the Discord, by the way, posting a lot of tips, but this is an article where it kind of helps you design like secondary and primary buttons. So maybe something like this would be good in this instance.
Yeah. That was an interesting example where you have the outline of the button and then you have text in the middle. And because the whole thing was set over a dark color, what often you have to do is take that type that you have in that hollow button and potentially make it one weight thicker than the type that you have in the white button, just because of that contrast. So that's, again, something that you discover by creating your design and then moving away from your computer and seeing what it looks like from a distance.
True. But yeah, and I like the color that you have. The blue looks really nice. And let's see if I can click this. Also, I would say, yeah, I like the transitions, but I would say I don't think you need this outline here. Since you are filling in the icon once it's selected, I think that's enough of a visual indication that this is selected. So.
We used to have a funny term at a job that I had a while ago. I'm trying to remember. I think we called it butt inception, like your button and its inception. So if you have a shape that's going to contain another shape, you can look at that and say, do I really need that additional shape to function in this layout? So here, for example, that filled in icon might be enough. Maybe it's just a line that's aligned to the bottom of the view that's white, so that you would say, okay, this tab is visible, and that way you don't have that object within an object happening.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, not a hard and fast rule, but something that we used to joke about a lot.
Sorry, I don't know why I got out of this. But great job. I love how you laid it out on Behance as well, and thank you for sharing it in Discord. Let's see if anyone, got some more feedback. Let's see what else we have. Okay, Nisha. Okay, so we have a video. Let's make this full screen. Cool.
Nice functioning tabs. Again, I would say size of objects is something I would explore a little bit. Those 3 pills that are underneath the star rating could probably be a little bit bigger. And I think don't be afraid to really use the layout to your advantage, especially with the comments like that. Maybe you decide that the comments are actually what are most important to your layout, and that's why you have them above the fold of the screen here. And if that's the case, what I would do is say that's the most important thing that I want to stress with this layout is that maybe the big idea is that we decide the movies that we watch based on recommendations from friends. So in that case, I would really push the comments to be the primary element within your layout and say, okay, we're going to take one comment and have that be right underneath the title, and that will help people determine if they want to watch the movie. So that's something where it's not so much of a visual design tweak, but it's a tweak to the overall concept that you're creating. That's kind of alluded to by the visual design.
I agree. I really like that you have comments, because a lot of times when I'm watching something on Netflix, like a show or a movie, I want to know what other people are thinking about what's going on. So usually I'll go on Twitter and search the movie to see what other people's reactions were. Like if I watched a show and it ended and I'm like, what was this ending? And then I want to see what other people thought. But I really like that you have comments. But I think, I would make that maybe if a higher priority on this. I think that would be awesome. So I like that you included that as well.
I'm always late to the Netflix recommendations. I'll see someone post on social media or something that, you need to binge watch this series. And it's like, thank you very much. I will go watch that series now. But I'm never the person that's actually discovering the series for the first time. But in that way, I think that's a really big part of how we discover new content is by word of mouth from people.
Exactly. Same with me. But this is great. I like how you also have the name of what the icon is underneath here.
That's from an accessibility standpoint, that's really strong because that makes it very apparent how people can navigate. So I think that's a wise choice there, especially with additional technology for people that are visually impaired. Sometimes we can read their screen. So if we have those elements tagged with a label, we're able to allow them to navigate more easily.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Let's look. Let's see if there's another one. Gummy Panda. Danning Lou. Oh, look, Pikachu. Okay.
A video there.
Let's see. Oh, nice.
That is really nice. It's nice to be able to preview what you have coming up.
Cool. I really like this animation that you have where when you drag the bar, the image or the scene, it kind of expands. So you know what scene you're jumping to.
Yeah.
I think that's
That is
awesome.
really nice.
Yeah. And it's a simple layout.
Everything is
nice.
well sized here
Yeah.
too for the scale of the screen as well. So that's
Yeah.
I know been my big theme of today is size. This adheres nicely to that, and the fact that our fingers are often larger than we design for.
Yeah, very true. But this is awesome. Yeah, it looks good.
Great.
You have the arrow. You have everything you need for a movie. Awesome. Okay, Samantha, let's see. Ooh. We have some different movie posters. A lot of people have been doing like movies that are in theaters, but
Ooh, look at that.
this is nice.
Wow.
Cool,
Some nice
menu.
interactions there.
Yeah.
Nice big text, easy to read.
Yeah. Oh, I like how you
That's
have
cool.
the cast. I always have to go to IMDb to see, like
where did
who
I
is
know this person
Yeah,
from?
that
Yeah.
always happens to me. Like I've seen you before somewhere. But yeah, this is really cool.
I like that the I think it was the sign-in button transitioned to then become the tab, and that's nice both from a visual design perspective, and then also because conceptually it's somewhat linked, right? Like it's that button is really the gateway to the experience, and then it's going to serve as the anchor for the experience once you're actually signed in. So there are some situations where those sorts of transitions don't make a whole lot of sense. It's like just because this was here, you then linked it to something else, and they aren't necessarily related. But there's a strong conceptual relationship, which is a good reason for creating that sort of animation.
Yeah, the animations are great. I love this part. I think I would just add the title. I don't know if these are actually movies or if, I don't know.
You haven't seen Fargo? No,
not
up
these,
there.
up here. But I also haven't seen Fargo.
Fargo's worth a watch.
But
yeah, those look like older movie posters
Yeah.
from like Hollywood's golden age.
Yeah, I don't know if they are actual movies. I'm sorry that I don't know. Maybe you have like the name underneath, but I think in these instances you can tell what the movie is.
Yeah, I think if those are movies, those posters are from an era before there was kind of a standardized approach to how people were making titles. So in this case, it is a little bit more difficult to read that title. So I would just allow for that in the design.
Exciting. But yeah, this is great. Awesome job. Let's see. Okay, so we can switch back over to you, Mark. If you guys are still working on your designs, feel free to submit them in the design feedback over on Discord, and I'll be in there today and giving you feedback, as well as everyone else in the community. So,
Great.
yes.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I should apologize about Fargo. I mean, it is a pretty gruesome movie. Not a lot of
Is
people
it?
have seen it.
Is it sad?
I wouldn't consider it sad. It's a
Okay.
it's a good film in the history of filmmaking, though. I do recommend it. Yeah. So I did see one comment while we were going through the feedback there that is it normal to design something and love it and then over time hate it? And that's welcome to the world of being a designer. I think that's all of us. The more we look at work, the more difficult it is to continue to like it over time, and especially work that you wish, as you gain more experience, you could go back and change. So that's just the natural process of being a designer. It's also why we, when I'm scoping projects, we never do anything at a pace that's faster than what we would anticipate would allow us to go back and take a fresh look at it. So the minimum amount of time that we would allow on a calendar to create something would be 2 calendar days, because we can create something on day 1, come in on day 2 and decide that it's not working and we really don't like it, and then readjust it. So absolutely normal. I was looking at something on my Behance actually this morning that I posted, I think 3 years ago at this point, and just thinking, wow, it's been so long since I did that project, and if I were to do that again, I would do it completely differently. So design changes. We try to make things that are timeless, but we really do that by adjusting the stylistic perspective so that we're not creating something that is very much linked to a moment in time. So we think about, design in the 90s and the late 80s where we had a lot of random geometric shapes and neon colors and all of that Nickelodeon sort of design that happened, and that was very much of that moment in time. It was the hot thing to do, but it has not aged well. It's if you see design that looks like that, it's referential to that point in time.
Yeah, like the old like 90s web design. Those are really funny to like look back on. And there's like I think it's like a pizza company in Seattle, and their website is like meant to be overly like saturated with all the very retro, a bunch of things going on, like a dog like animation. It's really funny.
Man.
But
I'll have to go back.
Yeah, I don't know what the company is, but it's pretty funny.
I remember writing just pure HTML into a browser and seeing what came out was always an interesting process. But
I have a question. If you could only choose one color to design with for the rest of your life, what color would you choose?
Oh man, if I had to design with it for the rest of my life, it would be just black over white, because how can you go wrong with that?
Yeah.
But if I had to choose like a really bold color, I'm into the blue that we've chosen for Rainfall. That is that like electric. I think the hex is it 000FFF, like just a pure blue. It works really well because it's got high contrast with white. You can pair it really well with a number of things. But I think the natural human tendency is to like blue over a lot of other colors because it is calming if we go into color theory and all of those aspects. But that's a difficult question.
I would pick black if I could. But for color, maybe purple. I don't know.
Purple's a strong choice. Yeah. A lot of designers use purple for UX stuff right now. It's a very
like
popular
a trendy,
color.
Trendy color.
But that's difficult. And that kind of gets into being a designer that evolves over time as well. When I was in college designing mostly for print, I would do everything in black and white because one, it's really simple to design with black and white, and two, there's just a nice clean aesthetic about it that really lasts over the course of time. And that's why we can look at design work from the 30s and 40s that's black and white and think, oh wow, we could put that on a wall today and it would look like it was brand new. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna jump back in here, but happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes left, so if you have any last minute questions, please ask them. I don't know how much, if you want to get another thing done, or maybe you can talk about what you want to do tomorrow on tomorrow's stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe tomorrow what we end up doing is start to link a few of these screens together so that we can talk about that approach to developing a framework where all of our screens live within one family of a product. I think that would be helpful. We can use some of the prototyping functionality and bring those elements together, and then we can talk about what's working and what's not working and how we would expand on our design as we move forward. There's already items with today where maybe this black color right here isn't working well because we have this color and then the color at the bottom. So things that, like I mentioned before, we can go away and think about overnight and then come back in and approach with a fresh set of eyes tomorrow.
Yeah. I think, it's always good to like take a step back from your design and then come back with fresh eyes, like you said, and then you'll see things that you didn't see before because you're just like staring at it. But when you come back, you're like, oh yeah, this needs to change.
Yeah.
But I'm excited. I'm excited to do the prototyping to see how that black call to action button kind of looks like when it goes into the title.
Yeah.
I think that would be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think we can have some fun playing with that as well. But yeah, I think that being able to have those conversations as well with your clients around how much time it realistically takes to create something is something that people get better with over time as well. It's often a difficult conversation to have because time in design is very much linked with price and how much we charge. And so to tell a client that you need more time to do something because you want to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be is often a difficult conversation to ask, because they might reply, how is it one day going to make the design better? Or, those are just difficult questions. So really believing in your process and being able to articulate that process and why more time equates to better work without feeling as though it's an artificial stipulation that you've put into your process is something that we get better with over time, and it's just a good conversation to have.
Has it ever been really difficult to convince a client that you need to spend more time on a project, or have they ever been like, no, I need it done now?
Yes, it's often very difficult to have those conversations. With a lot of work, it's often happening under a tight crunch, and we're pretty fast in the work that we create, but at the same time, we have a process that we like to follow. And that's really what it comes down to, is really teaching your client that the work that they've seen up until this point that you've created was created out of a process that you've developed. And so if you want to affect that process, it's going to affect the outcome of the work. And that's how you start to define how long things should take and how long they typically take. Processes like this for designing products vary a little bit just depending on the scale of the product. So when we do identity work, for instance, that's an easier example to give. A logo you could design in a day, or it might take you a year to design a logo, or it might take you a year to design a logo that you could have designed in a day. And that all comes through working through various ideas, creating as many ideas as you possibly can, and throwing away the ones that either don't work or that you don't like. And so what we typically do is define all of those elements as part of our process, and that process and that approach is what you are purchasing by working with Rainfall. So an identity has a minimum time amount for us. Even if we solve it on day one, we're going to then take the rest of that time to really stress test it and make sure that it's the best possible option for our client. So really sticking with your process makes for better work outcomes.
Thank you. Yeah. We have one last quick question. Would you recommend a book or resources on grids?
Yes, the red one. What is it called? It is called Grid Systems by, the author is German, and I'm totally blanking on the name. If someone in the chat can do a quick search on that.
Find that out for us.
It is like the standard go-to grid system book for all graphic designers. But what that will teach you is, especially with typography and leading, how you use multiple type sizes with your layouts to then align all of your baselines regardless of what your grid layout is.
Cool.
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yay. Thank you everyone in the chat once again for joining us and asking awesome questions and participating. We love having you here with us, and thanks again to Marc for everything you did and everything you taught us. I learned a lot of great tricks. Yay, awesome. And stay tuned for Howard. He'll be up next for the XD Daily Creative Challenge. And we'll be back tomorrow for day 3.
That's
tomorrow
great.
at 9:30.
The book in the chat is the book I just mentioned. So
nice.
That's the
Thanks,
the
Sam.
one.
Yay. Okay, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Thank you.